Hello there, welcome to Nighttime Stories. I hope you've had a wonderful day. Was it amazing or just okay? Drop a rating from 1 to 10 in the comments. Now it's time to unwind. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Before you get cozy, I'd love for you to like this video and subscribe. It helps bring more bedtime stories your way. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, take a deep breath, relax, and let's begin. I don't know if I'll post this, but I need to write it down while it's still fresh. Maybe if I lay it all out, it'll make sense. Maybe someone else has experienced something like this. Or maybe I'm just losing my mind. Last weekend, I went on a solo camping trip. I've done it plenty of times before, nothing extreme. Just a few days of hiking, fishing, and being away from people. There's something about being in the woods that clears my head. No phone buzzing, no city noise. Just the wind, the smell of pine, and the feeling of being completely free. That's what I wanted when I headed out to Black Hollow Forest. And that's exactly what I got. At first, I left early Saturday morning. The drive took about 4 hours, most of it on long stretches of empty highway, then onto a winding dirt road that led deep into the forest. I had picked Black Hollow because it was supposed to be remote but accessible. A friend of mine had camped there a year ago and said it was beautiful, with untouched trails and barely any foot traffic. Exactly what I wanted. But the deeper I drove, the more off it felt. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. The trees were thick, old-growth pines that towered over the road, blocking out most of the sky. The dirt path twisted unnaturally, curving too sharply at times, like it hadn't been made for cars. And the silence. That's what I remember most. Even with my windows down, I couldn't hear birds, insects, or anything except the gravel crunching under my tires. I tried to shake the unease creeping into my chest. It was just a quiet forest. That's why I came, right? I arrived around noon and picked a spot near a small creek. The place was pristinino litter, no signs of other campers. The air was crisp, cool, and smelled like damp earth. I set up my tent, built a fire pit, and took a short hike before the sun started to set. Everything felt normal again. For a while, as I sat by the fire that night, something shifted. It was subtle, the way the air felt suddenly heavier, like the woods were holding their breath. I glanced around, my skin prickling. The trees cast long shadows in the firelight, stretching toward me like fingers. The creek was still, its usual bubbling muted, like it was listening. I told myself I was overthinking things, just my brain playing tricks on me. Still, I kept my knife close when I crawled into my tent. The first night, I woke up to the sound of snapping branches. Not small twigs, big, deliberate cracks. I held my breath, straining to listen. It was close, maybe 20 feet from my tent. My first thought was a deer, maybe an elk. But there was something wrong with the way it moved. The steps weren't evenly spaced like an animal walking. It was more erratic. Slow, then fast, stopping suddenly, like it was testing the ground. I reached for my flashlight, careful not to make a sound. My fingers trembled as I clicked it on and aimed it at the tent wall. Nothing. The woods were silent again. I lay there, pulse pounding, waiting for another sound. It never came. Eventually, I convinced myself it was a tree branch falling, maybe a raccoon. I drifted back to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I stepped outside and my stomach dropped. There were footprints. Not animal tracks. Bare human footprints, circling my tent. I stood there, my bare feet sinking into the damp earth, staring at the footprints surrounding my tent. They weren't mine. I had been wearing hiking boots since I arrived, and these were barefoot-long, narrow prints, the toes slightly splayed. Human, but off. I swallowed hard, my skin prickling with unease. Maybe another camper wandered through in the night, but if that were the case, why hadn't they called out? Why would someone be walking around my tent at 3 a.m., barefoot, in the freezing cold? And why were there so many of them? They didn't just pass by, they circled, twice. I followed the prints, moving carefully, heart pounding. They started near the tree line, looped around my tent, then disappeared into the creek, vanishing completely. I crouched by the water's edge, scanning the opposite bank. No prints on the other side. I shivered. Whoever it was had walked into the water and never came out. I glanced around, suddenly hyper-aware of how alone I was. The woods were silent. No wind, no rustling leaves, no birds. Just heavy, suffocating stillness. Something was wrong. I spent the next hour packing up my gear. I wasn't leaving yet, but I needed to be ready. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe. Someone from another campsite messing around. Maybe a trick of the light on the footprints. But deep down, I knew better. I had been coming to the woods for years. This wasn't normal. Still, I tried to shake it off. I forced myself to eat breakfast, refilled my water bottles at the creek, and decided to go for a short hike before deciding whether to stay another night. A distraction. I needed a distraction. The trail I picked wasn't marked on my map, but it was clear and well-trodden, winding up a steep ridge. I followed it for maybe an hour, trying to focus on the sound of my own footsteps, the crunch of leaves underfoot. It worked. For a while. Then I found the deer. At first I thought it was just asleep. It was lying on its side in the middle of the trail, perfectly still. No visible wounds, no signs of struggle. But its eyes were open. I took a hesitant step closer. The second my boot crunched against the gravel, something moved. Not the deer. The branches above it. A low creak echoed through the trees, like a heavy rope shifting under weight. I tilted my head back, squinting against the dappled sunlight, and then I saw it. Something was hanging from the trees. Not a rope, not an animal, something pale. I stumbled backward so fast I nearly tripped. Whatever it wasn't moving. Just suspended there, watching. I didn't wait to get a better look. I turned and bolted back down the trail, lungs burning, branches slapping against my arms as I half ran, half slid down the ridge. I didn't stop until I could see the creek again, my campsite just beyond it. I forced myself to slow down, my heart still hammering. The woods were silent. Too silent. Like they were listening. I sucked in a deep breath and stepped into the clearing and froze. My tent was open. Wide open. Like someone had been inside. I stood there, every muscle in my body locked. I had zipped the tent shut when I left. I was sure of it. I scanned the area, my pulse thudding in my ears. No movement, no sound, but the entrance to my tent hung open like a gaping mouth. I forced myself forward, slow, careful steps crunching against the dirt. I reached the tent flap, hesitated, then pulled it back. Inside, everything was untouched. At first, then I saw my sleeping bag. It had been unrolled, flattened, like someone had lain down in it. My stomach twisted. I had packed it up this morning, tightly. And now, it was as if someone had been in my tent, had slept in my spot. I backed away, hands shaking. That was it. I was leaving. Now, I packed in record time, shoved my gear into my pack, stomped out the fire, double-checked my knife. My brain was screaming at me to get out, and for once I listened. I slung my pack over my shoulders and turned toward the path leading back to my car, and stopped cold. Someone was standing in the trees, maybe 30 feet away. I barely registered the details, just the shape of a person, half hidden in the shadows. Watching. I took a slow step backward. They didn't move. I swallowed, my throat dry. Another step. Still no reaction. Then they tilted their head, not like a person, not curious, more like an animal studying something smaller than it, something weaker, something it was deciding whether or not to kill. My pulse slammed against my ribs. Run. The word exploded in my head. Run. I took off, sprinting down the trail, pack slamming against my back, legs burning as I raced toward my car. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The entire forest felt like it was closing in, the trees stretching taller, darker, swallowing me whole. I crashed through the final stretch of brush and skidded to a stop. My car door was open. The driver's side door of my car was wide open. I had locked it. I knew I had. I could still feel the weight of the keys in my pocket, the sharp edges digging into my fingers. But now it was open, waiting. The engine was dead. The air was thick inside the car, the scent of damp earth curling in my nose. It was like something had been inside, watching, waiting for me to come back. I reached for the door handle, my grip on the knife in my other hand, tightening. My breath was coming too fast, my pulse hammering against my ribs. I leaned just enough to look inside. Nothing. The seats were empty. No sign of a break-in, no footprints in the dirt. But then I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The rearview mirror was tilted, not just moved angle toward the driver's seat. Like something had been sitting there, watching itself. I slammed the door shut and locked it, fingers fumbling over the keys as I jammed one into the ignition. The engine coughed, then died. A sound echoed from the trees, a low clicking exhale. I went still. The hair on my arms rose. The sound came again closer. I gritted my teeth, twisting the key one last time, slamming my foot onto the gas before the engine had even fully caught. The car lurched forward. In my mirror, I saw it. A tall, thin figure standing just beyond the tree line. No face, no eyes. And it was smiling, even though it had no mouth. I hit the gas harder, tires spitting gravel as I tore down the dirt road. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. Not until I was back on the highway, miles from that cursed place, the trees finally thinning behind me. I drove straight home. I barely remember the drive back. All I know is that when I finally pulled into my driveway, my hands were still shaking. I locked the doors, shut the blinds, and sat on the couch with my head in my hands, trying to piece together what had happened. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was a drifter, a prank, a trick of the light. But deep down I knew. I had seen something I wasn't meant to see, something that lives in those woods, and it had let me go. I never went back to Black Hollow. A few weeks later, I called the ranger station, asking if anyone else had reported strange activity in the area. The guy on the phone went quiet for a moment. Then he sighed. We get calls about Black Hollow every few months. I gripped the receiver. What kind of calls? Another pause. Then, people see things, hear things. Some of them go missing. My stomach twisted, and a longer silence. Then finally he said, and the ones who come back, they never do again. I don't camp anymore. I don't even go near the woods. Some nights, when I lie awake, I still hear that clicking sound, like something trying to mimic human speech. I tell myself it's my imagination, that I made the whole thing worse in my head. But deep down, I know the truth. I got away, and I won't push my luck again, because next time, I don't think it'll let me leave. I moved into the apartment 6 months ago. It wasn't anything fancy, just a one-bedroom rental in a high-rise building on the edge of downtown. The rent was decent, the place was clean, and the view was incredible. A floor-to-ceiling window stretched across my bedroom wall, overlooking the city below. At night I could see the entire skyline glowing billboards, distant headlights weaving through the streets, office towers flickering in the dark. It made the space feel open, alive. And on nights when I couldn't sleep, I'd sit in bed, watching the city move beneath me, feeling like I was part of something much bigger. That window made the apartment feel like home, until the night I saw the face. It started like any other night. I had been up late, scrolling mindlessly on my phone, the dull blue glow washing over the room. The city outside was quiet, only the occasional distant siren breaking the silence. At some point, I drifted off, the phone still in my hand. I don't know what woke me. A sound, a shift in the air, some primal instinct telling me something wasn't right. Whatever it was, I opened my eyes and there it was. A face, staring at me, right outside my bedroom window. I jolted upright, my pulse slamming into my throat. For a split second, I couldn't move. I just sat there, my breath caught in my chest, my eyes locked on the figure hovering beyond the glass. It wasn't a trick of the light. Someone was outside my window, on the 10th floor. My brain scrambled for an explanation. A window washer? No, there was no scaffolding. A reflection? No, this was a person. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. It was just there, watching me. Then, before I could react, it vanished. Not quickly, not like someone dropping out of view or stepping back. Just gone, like I had imagined the whole thing. I lunged for the lamp on my nightstand, fumbling with the switch. The room flooded with light, pushing back the darkness. I turned toward the window again. Nothing. The city lights flickered in the distance, the glass reflecting the room back at me. Empty. I sat there, my breath uneven, my skin damp with sweat. I waited, stared, but there was nothing there. The window was locked. It had to be my mind playing tricks on me, didn't it? By morning, the memory felt hazy, like a half-remembered nightmare. Maybe I had been dreaming. Maybe I had woken up mid-dream, my mind blurring the line between sleep and reality. But I couldn't shake the unease. The image of that face expressionless, watching, was burned into my brain. I needed to be sure. I stepped onto my balcony, gripping the railing as I leaned out to look up at my bedroom window. Nothing. No platforms, no ledges, no way for anyone to stand there. I leaned further, peering down. The street looked impossibly far below, a sheer drop to the sidewalk. No way up. No way down. No way anyone had been standing there. So what the hell had I seen? I spent the rest of the day trying to push it out of my head. By the time I got home from work, I had convinced myself it had been a trick of the light. Maybe I had woken up at just the right angle to see a reflection from another building. Maybe my mind had filled in the gaps. But that night, I kept the curtains closed, just in case. The next morning, I ran into my landlord in the lobby. She was an older woman, no nonsense, always busy. I figured she'd know if maintenance had been on the building overnight. I kept my voice casual. "Hey, was anyone working on the windows last night?" She frowned. "Number." My stomach twisted. I forced a chuckle. "Just wondering. Thought I saw something weird." Her frown deepened. "What kind of weird?" I hesitated. I didn't want to sound crazy. But before I could answer, she glanced toward the hallway, then lowered her voice slightly. "What floor are you on again?" "The 10th. A pause. Then her voice came out lower. "Which unit?" 1009. She exhaled sharply, almost like she had been expecting it. I stared at her. "What?" She shook her head, brushing it off. "Nothing. Just keep your windows locked." A cold shiver ran through me. I forced a laugh. "Yeah, of course." But something in her face told me she wasn't joking. I wanted to press her for more. But before I could, she turned and walked away. And for the rest of the day, no matter how much I tried to push it out of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew exactly what I had seen. That night, I tried to convince myself that everything was normal. But at 3:42 a.m., my phone buzzed. A notification from my security app. Motion detected. Bedroom window. My breath stalled. I reached for my phone with trembling hands and tapped the notification. The video feed loaded. My bedroom was dark. Empty. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the camera flickered. Just for a moment. Just long enough for me to see it. A face. Staring. Before the screen cut to black, I stared at my phone, my heart hammering. The screen had gone black, the video feed cutting out entirely. I tapped the app again, refreshing the camera. Nothing. A grainy, empty view of my bedroom. The window was still shut, the curtains drawn tight. But I had seen it. A face, staring through the glass. For several seconds I sat frozen, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. My body screamed for me to do something, anything, but I couldn't move. I played the clip again. The motion detection had picked up something at 3:42 a.m. The video started normally, just a dim night vision view of my room. Then a flicker. The feed glitched for a second, and when it came back, the face was there. Just for a moment. Not pressed against the glass, not hovering. It was just there, watching. Then, another flicker and it was gone. I felt something tighten in my chest. I reached for my nightstand drawer, fumbling until my fingers wrapped around the small pocket knife I kept there. It wasn't much, but holding it made me feel less powerless. I had to check. I had to be sure. The air in my bedroom felt heavy as I pulled back the blanket and stepped onto the cold hardwood floor. My feet moved on instinct, my breath shallow, my pulse a dull roar in my ears. I stopped in front of the curtains. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I reached forward and yanked them open. Nothing. Just the city stretching out below, streetlights flickering, headlights moving in the distance. No face. No shadow. Nothing. I exhaled sharply, pressing my palm against my chest. My heart was pounding. I checked the lock on the window, still secure. I ran my fingers along the edges of the frame, checking for any gaps. There was no way anyone could have been standing there. But I had seen it. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I had barely slept, the unease settling deep in my chest. I couldn't shake the memory of the landlord's reaction the day before the way. She had seemed to recognize my apartment number. I needed answers. I needed to know if something had happened here before. I waited until I knew she'd be in the office, then headed downstairs. The lobby was quiet when I entered. The landlord, Mrs. Carver, sat behind the desk, sorting through paperwork. She looked up as I approached. For a moment, her face was unreadable. Then she sighed. 10:09, right? I nodded slowly. She set her pen down and rubbed her temples. I was hoping you wouldn't ask. My stomach twisted. So you do know something. She hesitated, then motioned for me to follow her. I trailed her down a narrow hallway toward a door marked storage. She unlocked it, revealing a dimly lit room filled with filing cabinets. She flipped through a drawer, pulling out an old tenant file. Jiu. She handed it to me. I opened it. The first page was a termination notice, dated 3 years ago. My eyes skimmed over the details, and then my breath caught. Tenant, Daniel Carter, cause of termination, deceased. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. What happened to him? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Carver sighed, crossing her arms. It was tragic. Daniel was young, lived alone. He started telling people he was seeing things outside his window. A sharp jolt of fear shot through me. I looked up. What kind of things? She gave me a weary look. Faces. I felt the room tilt slightly, my grip on the folder tightening. And no one believed him? She exhaled. At first, people thought he was paranoid. He called the cops a few times, swore someone was outside, but there was never anyone there. I swallowed hard. Then what? She hesitated. He stopped coming outside. Neighbors said he covered his windows, wouldn't answer the door. Then one day, she trailed off, shaking her head. They found him in his bedroom, dead. A heavy silence filled the room. I forced myself to breathe. How did he die? She hesitated. It looked like he fell, but the way his body was positioned, it didn't make sense. A cold weight settled in my chest. What do you mean? She lowered her voice. He fell from the window, but it was still locked from the inside. The words hit me like a punch. My stomach twisted, my hands trembling slightly as I shut the folder. I looked up at her. And no one else has lived there since? She shook her head. Not for long. I swallowed hard. Why? She hesitated. Because they all say the same thing. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. I already knew what she was going to say. They all saw the face. That night, I kept the lights on. I tried to distract myself, watched television, played music, anything to drown out the thoughts swirling in my head. But when 3 a.m. rolled around, the air changed. A pressure settled over the room, thick and heavy. Then a sound. A soft, barely audible tap. Coming from the window. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then another. Tap, tap. My stomach clenched. It was real. I turned my head slowly. The curtains were still drawn. The tapping came again, gentle, deliberate. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew, but I reached for my phone with a shaking hand, opened the security app, and tapped into the live feed. The screen flickered. Then there it was. A face, pressed against the glass. Too high, too far from the balcony. Mouth slightly open. No breath fogging the window. No eyes. Just black, empty sockets. I dropped the phone. And then, the window lock slid open. I didn't move. My breath stalled in my chest as I watched the latch turn on its own, the soft metallic click cutting through the silence like a knife. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. But it was. I gripped the edge of the blanket with white-knuckled fingers, my entire body locked in place as I watched the latch lift slow, deliberate until it was fully unhooked. And then the window began to slide open. A rush of cold air swept into the room, chilling my skin, making my stomach turn. My instincts screamed at me to run, to move, to do anything. But I couldn't, because I wasn't alone. Something stepped inside. I felt it before I saw it. A shift in the air, a presence heavy, unnatural. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A shadow. It didn't lunge at me. It didn't rush forward. It just stood there. I forced myself to look, and I regretted it instantly. The face. It was exactly like I had seen before, pale, unnatural, empty. But this time, it was closer. Much closer. The hollow sockets where its eyes should have been seemed to bore into me, dark and endless. And the mouth too wide, slightly open, like it was about to speak. But it didn't. It just watched. Then it moved. Not like a person. Not naturally. It twitched, jerked forward an inch, then another, too fast, too wrong. I choked on a breath, my body finally breaking free of the paralysis. I scrambled backward, nearly falling off the bed. My phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. I barely registered the sound. I was already moving. I ran, straight for the door. I grabbed the handle, twisted, locked. Number, no. I fumbled with the bolt. my hands slick with sweat, my pulse roaring in my ears. Behind me, the air shifted again. A presence closer. I could feel it now, right behind me. Then a whisper, barely audible. Don't look. Every muscle in my body seized. I felt ice crawl through my veins. The voice was wrong. Not deep, not high. Just empty. Like the sound was being pulled from somewhere else. A dry, airless exhale that didn't belong in this world. The bolt finally turned. I yanked the door open and ran. I didn't stop. Not in the hallway, not in the stairwell. I sprinted all the way down 10 flights of stairs, my breath burning in my chest, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. When I burst into the lobby, Mrs. Carver was still at the front desk. Her head snapped up as I stumbled toward her, gasping for air. It was in my apartment. I choked out. It came inside. Her expression didn't shift the way I expected. She didn't laugh, didn't tell me I was crazy. Instead, she just looked at me. And in her eyes, I saw something that made my stomach sink. She wasn't surprised. She already knew. She didn't ask me to explain. She didn't try to calm me down. She just walked out from behind the desk and gestured for me to follow her. And I did, because I needed answers. She led me to the maintenance officer room I had never seen before, tucked behind a hallway near the elevator. She opened a cabinet, pulled out a stack of old files, and set them on the table. Then, without looking at me, she said, "You're not the first." My blood ran cold. I reached for the first folder and flipped it open. Tenant name, Daniel Carter. The man who lived in 1009 before me. There was a report inside a complaint he had filed with the building's management. Strange noises at night, scratching at the window, a figure in the glass. Then another report. I saw it. It was inside. My breath caught in my throat. The last page was a death certificate. He had fallen from the same window, the one that was locked from the inside. I flipped to the next folder. Another tenant. Same unit. Same complaints. More pages. More reports. Years of them. Some tenants moved out. Some didn't. I swallowed hard. "What is it?" Mrs. Carver finally met my eyes. "No one knows." Her voice was tired, like she had seen this too many times before. "We've tried everything. Blessings, sealing the windows, security cameras." She shook her head. "It doesn't matter. It always comes back." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "Then why rent it out?" She exhaled, looking away. "Because the city won't condemn the unit, and no one wants to talk about what they can't explain." A bitter laugh escaped my throat. "So you just let people live there?" Her eyes darkened. "I tell people to keep the curtains closed." I felt sick. All the previous tenants, all the people who had seen it, they had been warned. I hadn't. I slammed the file shut, my hands trembling. "I'm leaving." Mrs. Carver nodded. "That's probably best." I never went back to that apartment. I didn't pack my things. I didn't even cancel the lease. I just left. A week later, I got a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer. I never answer unknown numbers anymore, because sometimes late at night I still dream about the face. I dream that it's outside my window again, that it's watching me sleep. And in the dream, I always make the same mistake. I look, and when I do, I realize something. It isn't outside. It's inside, right next to me, waiting for me to blink, for me to forget, for me to look away just for a second. And then, when I do, it's the last thing I ever see. A few years back, I was in a tight spot financially. Bills were piling up, and my part-time gig at the local diner wasn't cutting it. One evening, while scrolling through job listings, I stumbled upon an ad. Earn $1,000 a week for part-time cleaning. Flexible hours. It sounded like a godsend. I was skeptical but desperate. The contact was a local number, so I decided to call. A man named Mr. Thompson answered. He explained that they needed someone to clean out apartments after tenants had abruptly left. He assured me the job was straightforward: clean the place, dispose of any left-behind items, and ensure it was ready for the next occupant. The pay was indeed $1,000 per week for about 20 hours of work. It seemed too good to be true, but I convinced myself that maybe I'd just gotten lucky. My first assignment was an apartment in a part of town I wasn't familiar with. The building was old but well maintained. Mr. Thompson met me outside, handed me the keys, and told me to call him once I was done. He didn't come in with me, which I found odd, but I brushed it off. Inside, the apartment was eerily pristine. It looked like someone had just stepped out for a moment. Dishes were in the sink, a half-empty coffee cup on the table, and even a newspaper dated 2 days prior lay on the couch. It was as if the tenant had vanished into thin air. As I started cleaning, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Several times I thought I heard faint whispers, but whenever I paused to listen, there was only silence. In the bedroom, I found a journal on the nightstand. Curiosity got the better of me, and I skimmed through it. The entries were mundane at first, notes about work, grocery lists, reminders. But the last entry caught my attention. March 15th. I keep seeing shadows in the corners of my eyes. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but now I'm certain something is here with me. I hear whispers at night, calling my name. I don't know how much longer I can stay here. A chill ran down my spine. I closed the journal and decided to finish up quickly. As I was about to leave, I noticed a small door in the hallway that I hadn't opened. It was a closet, mostly empty except for a few old coats. But behind the coats, I found a trapdoor leading to a crawl spaces. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The space was dark, but I could make out something glinting in the far corner. Using my phone's flashlight, I crawled in and reached for the object. It was a small, ornate box. Inside the box were several Polaroid photos. Each photo was of a different person, standing in the very apartment I was in. They all looked distressed, and in each photo there was a shadowy figure standing just behind them, barely visible. I felt a cold draft and heard a whisper right next to my ear. I bolted out of the crawl space, grabbed my things, and left the apartment, locking the door behind me. I called Mr. Thompson and told him I couldn't continue with the job. He didn't seem surprised. "I understand," he said. "You're not the first to leave abruptly." I never went back, and I never collected the payment. To this day, I wonder about the people in those photos and what might have happened to them. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I think I hear whispers calling my name. I never thought I'd be the type of person to get paranoid. I've spent my whole life working with locks, securing homes, fixing broken doors. I know what keeps people safe. But after what happened a few years ago, I don't feel safe anymore. And if you knew what I knew, you wouldn't either. I used to be a locksmith. A good one, too. I worked for a small company that handled everything from apartment lockouts to high-security installations. Most of the time, it was straightforward. People lose their keys. People need their locks changed after a breakup. Nothing strange, until I got a call one night that changed everything. It was around 9 p.m. when dispatch called me. I was just about to settle in for the night when my work phone buzzed. "Got a job for you. Last-minute call-in," my boss said. "Lady's locked out of her house. She sounds shaken up. Might be an emergency." I sighed, already exhausted from the day, but overtime meant extra pay. "Address?" I asked. He gave it to me. It was in a quiet suburban neighborhood about 20 minutes away. I grabbed my gear and headed out. The street was dark when I arrived. No streetlights, just the glow from a few scattered porch lights. The house in question was a 2-story, older model, the kind with a wraparound porch and a heavy oak door. It was well maintained, nothing out of the ordinary, except for the woman standing outside. She looked to be in her late 40s, dressed in a loose cardigan and jeans. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, and her eyes darted around as if she expected something or someone to jump out of the shadows. She looked scared. I parked and grabbed my tools. As I walked up, I gave her the usual greeting. "Luck out, ma'am." She nodded quickly. Yes, please, She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder toward the darkened windows. I followed her gaze. Nothing looked off. The house was still, quiet, but something about it made the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I forced a smile. No worries. Should only take a few minutes. She nodded again, stepping aside. I knelt in front of the lock and got to work. It was an older model, but nothing I couldn't handle. As I picked, I tried to make conversation to ease her nerves. "Lose your keys?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, in a tight voice, she said, "No, I didn't lose them. Someone else has them." I stopped mid-pick, looking up. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest. She was shaking. My gut twisted. "Someone broke in?" I asked carefully. She exhaled sharply, nodding. I think so. I don't know. The locks were fine when I left this morning, but when I got home, the front door was unlocked, and I never leave it unlocked." I frowned. "Did you call the police?" She hesitated again. "No. I thought about it, but..." She stopped, shaking her head. I didn't press. Some people don't trust the cops. Others don't want to cause a scene. But something about her demeanor felt off. I went back to work. Within a minute, the lock clicked. I stood up, stepping aside. "All said," I said. "Do you want me to check inside first, make sure no one's there?" She hesitated. Then she whispered, "Would you..." That was my second red flag. Locksmiths don't usually go inside. Liability and all that, but I'm not heartless. The woman looked genuinely terrified. I nodded. She reached for the handle, but stopped. Then, after a second, she gestured for me to open it instead. That was my third red flag. Something about this wasn't right. I pushed the door open. The house was dark, the air inside stale, heavy. It smelled faintly of cleaning supplies, but underneath it was something else, something off. I stepped inside, flipping the light switch. Nothing happened. "The power's out?" I asked, turning back to her. She nodded. "It was fine this morning. When I got home, nothing worked." Another layer of unease settled in my gut. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a neat, perfectly normal-looking home. A couch, a coffee table, family photos on the wall. But something felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was there. That quiet, creeping sensation that something isn't where it should be. I stepped further inside, scanning the living room. Everything looked untouched. Then I saw the hallway. The door at the end was open. Just slightly, like someone had been watching the front door and left in a hurry. A chill ran through me. I turned to the woman, keeping my voice steady. "You said the door was unlocked when you got home?" She nodded. I swallowed. "Did you check inside before you called me?" She shook her head. My pulse spiked. That meant whoever had been here could still be inside. Slowly, I reached into my bag, pulling out the heavy-duty flashlight I kept for jobs like this. I stepped toward the hallway, moving as quietly as possible. The air grew thicker. The smell, stale, human, got stronger. I reached the open door, pushed it, and froze. The closet was full of blankets, old boxes, and hanging coats. But between them, half hidden in the dark, I saw a pair of shoes, and they weren't empty. My chest locked up. Someone was in there. I didn't move. For a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, that I was seeing things, that the shoes were just part of the mess. Then they shifted. I backed up fast, heart slamming against my ribs. "There's someone in your house." My voice was low, urgent. "We need to go. Now." The woman's eyes widened. She turned, bolting for the door. I didn't look back. We ran onto the porch just as something inside moved. A rustling sound, then the soft, unmistakable creak of floorboards. We sprinted to my van. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking. The woman was already sobbing. I dialed 911. When the cops arrived, they searched the house. Nothing. No one inside. No signs of forced entry. No proof that anyone had been there at all. But here's the part that still haunts me. They found a crawl space in the attic. Inside it, a sleeping bag, empty food wrappers, a small pile of clothing. Someone had been living there. Watching, listening, waiting. That was the last job I ever took. Because now, every time I hear a creak in my own house, I wonder if someone is still inside. I used to see him nearly every morning, always standing near the corner of Foster and 8th, where the city met the quieter, more residential streets. He never begged, never moved, just stood there in the same worn-out gray coat, hands tucked into his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, as if bracing against a cold only he could feel. At first I didn't pay him much mind. It's a city, people exist in their own worlds. But after a few weeks, I started to notice him. His face was lean, hollow, like someone who had either given up or been worn down by something much larger than himself. His dark eyes didn't dart around like most people in his situation. They stayed locked on one point: the entrance to my office building. I tried not to dwell on it. I'd remind myself that cities were full of forgotten people, those who had simply slipped through the cracks of life. It wasn't my place to judge or interfere. But that didn't explain the feeling. The one that started creeping in after a month or so. The sense that he wasn't just standing there, that he was waiting. I was never the kind of person to fixate on things. I had my routine, my job, my small, predictable life, and I liked it that way. I wasn't the guy who noticed strangers, or who let his mind wander into places it didn't belong. Maybe that's why it took me so long to put the pieces together. Or maybe I just didn't want to. I grew up in a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where nothing ever really changed. My father was a quiet man, an observer. He wasn't warm, not in the way my mother was. He didn't fill the house with laughter or soft reassurances, but he was constant, reliable in his own way. He worked hard, but never spoke much about his job. As a kid, I thought nothing of it. Parents go to work, they come home. That was life. My mother was the opposite of him, vibrant, full of life, someone who left a room feeling lighter than when she'd entered it. She balanced him out. For the most part, we were normal. We weren't perfect, but we were solid. Until we weren't. Until the day he left. I was 17, old enough to understand that something was wrong, but not old enough to know how to fix it. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no long, painful speeches about broken love or resentment. One day he just left, walked out the door, and never came back. The police took the report. They asked the questions. My mother cried, then grew quiet, then stopped speaking about him entirely. It was as if, overnight, he had simply been erased from our lives. And maybe that was easier. Maybe it was better than the not knowing. At least, that's what I told myself. But deep down, I always knew it was a lie. Because you don't just disappear. Not without reason. Not without leaving something behind. I hadn't thought about him in years. Not until that morning, when I finally looked closer at the man on the corner. The moment I saw the jacket, I felt my stomach tighten. At first, I didn't understand why. It was just an old coat, nothing remarkable. Faded, tattered at the cuffs, the color worn from time. And then it clicked. I'd seen that jacket before. Not just somewhere. On someone. My father, he'd had a gray wool coat exactly like it. The same cut, the same worn fabric, the same small tear near the left sleeve. The same missing top button. My head felt light. I blinked, gripping the strap of my bag as if it could tether me to the ground. It wasn't possible. It had been 10 years. And yet there it was, the jacket, my father's jacket, worn by a man I had never met. That day, instead of walking past him, I stopped. Up close, the details were even clearer. The jacket wasn't just similar, it was the same one. I could see the faint stain near the collar, the exact way the fabric had creased over years of wear. My throat was dry, my pulse hammered in my ears. "Where did you get that coat?" I asked. The man's expression didn't change. For a long moment, he just watched me. Then, slowly, he reached up, fingers brushing over the patch on the sleeve. His voice, when it came, was quiet. It was given to me. A chill ran through me. "By who?" He tilted his head slightly, like he was considering whether to answer. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he said, "By a man who lost everything." My blood ran cold. I felt the air shift around me, the city noise fading into the background. I stepped closer. "Who was he?" A pause. Then he spoke, low, careful. "You already know." A memory surfaced, a conversation I hadn't thought about in years. I was 15, sitting across from my father at the kitchen table. It had been one of those rare moments where he spoke about himself, about his past. "Some people don't just disappear," he had said. His voice was quiet, like he was talking to himself more than to me. I had frowned. "What do you mean?" He had sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Sometimes they're made to disappear." It hadn't made sense to me then, but standing there, looking into the stranger's eyes, I understood. I wasn't just talking to some homeless man. I was talking to a ghost of my father's past. Someone who knew what happened to him. Someone who knew why he left. I took a step back. "Tell me the truth. Who are you?" The man exhaled, his breath visible in the cold morning air. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. Something that shattered everything I thought I knew. "I'm the reason he ran." I felt my body go cold. The noise of the city faded. The distant honks, the low hum of passing voices, the shuffle of footsteps on the pavement. All of it drowned beneath the weight of his words. "I'm the reason he ran." My throat tightened. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The rational part of me, the part that functioned in meetings, that paid bills, that dismissed paranoia, wanted to scoff, to shake my head, step back and walk away. But I didn't, because deep down, I knew he was telling the truth. The way he said it wasn't dramatic. There was no smugness, no theatrics, just a quiet, matter-of-fact statement. I took a slow breath, forcing my voice to stay even. "What?" The man tilted his head slightly, as if considering whether I deserved an answer. Then, finally, and knew something he wasn't supposed to. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I wanted to press him for more. What did he know? Why did he leave? Where is he now? But I could barely keep my mind straight. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something deep, something dark, something I wasn't meant to look into. The man must have seen the shift in my expression because his gaze softened. "You shouldn't go looking for him," he said. "Some people disappear for a reason." I stared at him, my pulse thudding against my temples. And then, before I could say another word, he turned and walked away. It happened so fast, so casually, as if our entire conversation had never happened. He melted into the stream of pedestrians, his form swallowed by the morning crowd. I could have followed him. I almost did, but something in my gut, something primal, told me not to. I stood there for a long time, my breath uneven, my hands ice cold despite the warmth of the sun. Then, finally, I turned and went inside my office. I barely got through work that day. My mind wouldn't stop circling the same thoughts, the same possibilities. Was my father alive? Was he in hiding? And from who? I thought about calling my mother, but what would I even say? "Hey, remember Dad?" "Yeah, I think I just met a guy who knows what happened to him." She had worked so hard to move on, to push his disappearance into the past. Digging it back up after all these years felt wrong, but doing nothing felt worse. So, that night I did what any restless, paranoid person would do. I started searching. I didn't have much to go on, but I had my father's old records. Some paperwork my mother never threw away. A work history, old bank statements, a few contacts he had listed for emergencies. I started making calls. Most of them went nowhere, disconnected numbers, dead ends. But one answered. It was an old friend of his, a guy named Carl Whitmore. I barely remembered him, just a vague recollection of a man who used to come over for dinner a few times when I was a kid. The second I said my name, there was silence. Then, in a hushed voice, Carl asked, "Why are you calling me about your father?" My stomach clenched. "Because I need to know what happened to him." Another pause. Then, quieter, "Has someone been watching you?" The question sent a spike of adrenaline through me. Had someone been watching me? The man on the street? Was that what he had been doing all along? I swallowed, gripping the phone tighter. "I don't know." Carl exhaled sharply. "Listen to me. Let it go. Whatever you think you want to know, it's not worth it. Your father knew that. That's why he left." "Left to go where?" "I don't know," Carl said. "And if I did, I wouldn't tell you." "Carl, forget this number." Click. The call ended. I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at my phone. I should have been frustrated, angry, but mostly I felt uneasy. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the tone. Carl had sounded afraid, genuinely afraid. And that terrified me. Because if he was scared, if my father had been scared, then what the hell had he gotten involved in? And more importantly, was it coming for me now? I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying the conversation, trying to figure out what to do next. I wanted to keep searching, but something inside me, something instinctual, was telling me to stop, to listen to Carl, to let it go. And maybe I would have. Maybe I would have shut the door on the past and moved on with my life. But the next morning, when I stepped outside for work, I felt it. That sinking feeling. Like I was being watched. I turned my head slowly, scanning the street. Pedestrians walked by, cars crawled through traffic, nothing out of the ordinary. And then, there, across the street, the man was back. Same tattered jacket, same hollow stare. But this time, he wasn't standing still. He was walking toward me. I didn't go to work that day. I turned around, locked my apartment door, and sat with my back against it, heart pounding, breath coming in short, uneven bursts. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what he wanted. But I knew one thing. He wasn't just some homeless man. And whatever my father had run from, it had finally found me. I stayed in my apartment for the rest of the day. I didn't turn on the lights. I barely moved. Every time I so much as breathed, I felt like someone was listening. I sat by the peephole for hours, watching the hallway, waiting for a shadow to move across the door. I didn't know what I was expecting. Someone knocking? A voice calling my name? The sound of a key slipping into the lock. But nothing came. Eventually, exhaustion got the best of me. I crashed on the couch, my mind replaying every single moment of the last few days. The man on the street, the jacket, the phone call, and that one sentence that refused to leave my head. "I'm the reason he ran." I don't know when I fell asleep, but when I woke up, it was dark. The apartment was silent, the kind of silence that felt unnatural, too thick, too heavy. And then, a noise, soft, subtle, coming from outside my door. I held my breath. It wasn't knocking, it wasn't footsteps. It was breathing, slow, measured. Someone standing just outside, listening, waiting. I stayed completely still, my fingers gripping the couch. My pulse thudded against my skull. The breathing stopped. Silence. Then, a piece of paper slid under the door. I stared at it, my whole body locking up. My apartment had no windows facing the hallway. I had no way of seeing who was out there. Seconds passed, then minutes. I didn't move until I heard the faintest sound of footsteps retreating. Slow, steady, like whoever had been there wanted me to know they weren't in a rush. Finally, when the silence stretched long enough that my ears rang from the pressure, I crawled forward. The note was folded, crisp, almost too clean for something delivered like this. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, there was only one line, written in my father's handwriting. "Stop looking. I don't remember the next few minutes. Maybe I sat there, maybe I whispered something under my breath, maybe I closed my eyes and pretended I was dreaming. But deep down I knew this was real. I knew my father was alive. And more than that, I knew he was watching. I should have been relieved. I should have felt some kind of closure, some kind of answer after all these years. But I didn't. Because if he was alive, that meant he had never left. He had just been hiding from them, from the man on the street. And now, because I had been stupid enough to start digging, they knew where I was, too. That night, I packed a bag. I called my boss, told him I was taking a leave of absence. I didn't say why. Then, I turned off my phone, threw it in the trash, and left my apartment. Not just for the night, not just for a while, for good. Because whatever my father had been running from, whatever shadow had been looming over his life for the past 10 years, it had finally caught up to me, and I wasn't going to wait around to find out why. I sat there on the floor for what felt like an eternity, the note still clenched in my fingers, the weight of it pressed into my chest, heavy, suffocating. Stop looking. Not a warning, a command. I knew then, without a doubt, that my father was alive. But he wasn't trying to find me. He wasn't coming back. He was keeping me away, and that meant only one thing. Whatever he ran from, he was still running. And now, because I had gone looking, I had put myself in the same danger. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaky, my body humming with adrenaline. My apartment suddenly felt too small, too vulnerable. I grabbed my phone, staring at the screen, debating whether to call someone. The police? My mother? But what would I even say? The man gave me a note in my missing father's handwriting. Please help. They wouldn't believe me, and even if they did, even if an officer came by, interviewed me, what could they do? This wasn't just about a missing person. This was about someone who didn't want to be found. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside my head. I needed to be rational, logical. I needed to do what my father had done. I needed to disappear. I packed a small bag, just the essentials. Cash, a change of clothes, my passport. Then, I did something I never thought I would. I pulled the SIM card from my phone, snapped it in half, and dropped it in the sink. Then, I turned on the faucet and let the water carry the tiny pieces down the drain. No more tracking, no more calls. I wasn't taking any chances. I didn't leave right away, that would be too obvious. Instead, I waited until just before dawn, when the streets were empty, when the city was quiet. I kept my hood up, my head down. I walked in the opposite direction of my office, of my usual coffee shop, of anywhere someone might expect me to go. I went to the train station, bought a ticket to a city I had never been to, and when the train doors slid shut behind me, I exhaled for the first time in hours. But as I stared out the window, watching the skyline shrink into the distance, one thought refused to leave my mind. Was it over? Or had I just put myself one step closer to whatever my father had been running from? I didn't know, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to find out. And if I was smart, I never would. That was 2 years ago. I don't live in the same city anymore. I don't use my real name. I don't stay in one place for too long. I still don't know what my father was caught up in, and I don't ask. I don't search for him. And if he's out there, somewhere in the shadows, watching, waiting, making sure I listened, I hope he knows that I did. Because I don't want to know the truth anymore. I just want to be left alone. And I hope, God, I hope they let me. I take the same subway to work every morning. Same train, same time, same seat, if I can get it. It's a routine I don't think much about, just a mindless part of my day, one that I go through without really seeing anyone around me. But yesterday something changed, and now I can't stop thinking about it. The train was crowded but quiet. Rush hour always packed the subway with a mix of office workers, students, and exhausted night shift employees heading home. I had managed to find a seat near the middle of the car, wedged between a woman scrolling through emails and an older man staring blankly at the floor. I had my headphones in, my usual playlist humming low in the background, but I wasn't really listening. I was just staring at my phone, flipping through news headlines, waiting for the ride to be over. That's when I felt it. Not a touch, not a sound. Just a feeling that someone was watching me. I tried to ignore it at first. People glance at each other all the time on the subway. It's normal. But the sensation wouldn't go away. It crawled up my spine, an itch in the back of my mind that I couldn't shake. Slowly, I looked up. There was a man sitting directly across from me, phone in hand. He looked normal enough, mid-30s, dark jacket, short, unkempt hair. But something about him felt off. It wasn't just that he was looking at me. It was how he was looking. Not casually, not like he had just happened to glance up from his screen. His eyes flicked between me and his phone, almost like he was checking something. I frowned, shifting in my seat, trying to shake the unease curling in my stomach. I was probably imagining things, reading too much into it. Then, in the dull reflection of the subway window behind him, I saw his screen, and my blood ran cold. It was a photo of me, not a live camera feed, not a reflection. A picture, a still image of my face, clear as day, taken from an angle I didn't recognize. I felt my chest tighten. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it was a stock photo of someone who looked like me. But then, he swiped left. Another photo. Me again. Swipe. Another. And another. I felt a jolt of panic shoot through me. The pictures weren't just from today. Some of them were from weeks ago. Months. My heart slammed against my ribs. What the hell was I looking at? I forced myself to stay calm, to breathe through the sudden nausea threatening to rise in my throat. I needed to know for sure. I shifted slightly, pretending to adjust my bag, angling my head just enough to see his screen better. The next photo made my stomach drop. It was of me in my apartment. Not a selfie, not something I had taken. A photo of me sitting on my couch, in my pajamas. I stopped breathing. That picture wasn't on my phone. I knew for a fact I had never posted it, never sent it, never taken it. How did he have it? I sat frozen, my entire body locked in place. The subway rumbled along the tracks, rocking slightly as it carried us forward, but everything around me blurred into nothing. All I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I needed to move. I needed to say something. But what? My mouth felt dry. My fingers curled into my lap, blood draining from my knuckles. Then, before I could even process what I was doing, I spoke. "Where did you get those?" My own voice startled me. It came out hollow, quieter than I expected. The man's head snapped up. His expression barely changed, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of amusement, like he had been waiting for me to say something. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then he smirked. A small, almost imperceptible curl of his lips. And then, without a word, he stood up. The train slowed. We were pulling into the next station. I turned in my seat, my pulse racing. He started walking toward the doors, completely unbothered, slipping his phone into his jacket pocket. I should have followed him, should have demanded an answer, but my body wouldn't move. I just sat there, frozen in place, watching him leave. The doors slid open with a mechanical hiss. He stepped off onto the platform and disappeared into the crowd. Gone. I sat there for 3 more stops, my mind spinning, replaying everything. The photos. The way he looked at me. The fact that he didn't even try to hide it. Finally, I forced myself to move. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, my fingers moving before my brain could catch up. I opened my camera roll, scanned through my albums, checked my social media. Nothing. None of those pictures existed anywhere on my accounts. I went through every folder, every archive, even my cloud backups. Nothing. It didn't make sense. The only way he could have gotten that photo of me at home was if someone else had taken it, or if someone had access to my camera without me knowing. A sickening realization settled in my stomach. Had my phone been hacked? I switched off my Wi-Fi, disabled my Bluetooth, deleted every third-party app I didn't recognize. I wasn't even sure if it would help, but I was panicking, grasping at anything that made me feel like I had control. The train screeched to a stop at my station. I stepped off in a daze, checking over my shoulder instinctively. He was gone, but something told me this wasn't over. As I walked toward my apartment, my phone buzzed. A notification. An airdrop request. My breath hitched. The file name was just one word. Smile. I stared at the screen, my pulse roaring in my ears. The preview image was blurred, but I could still make out the shape of a face. My face. And I wasn't smiling. I didn't accept the airdrop. I couldn't. My fingers hovered over the screen, my breath shallow, heart pounding so violently I could feel it in my throat. The file name, Smile. The preview image, my own face, blurred but unmistakable. I didn't know what to do. If I accepted it, I'd be letting this person, whoever they were, send something directly to my phone. But if I declined, then what? Would they just try again? I quickly looked around, scanning the crowd outside the subway station. No one seemed out of place. Dozens of people, all caught up in their own route and checking their phones, rushing to their next destination, oblivious to the fact that I was losing my mind. Was he still here? Watching? I clenched my phone, my stomach twisting. I knew airdrop requests only worked within a certain range. He had to be close. I glanced over my shoulder. A man in a navy hoodie leaned against the wall near the exit, staring at his phone. A woman with a stroller scrolled absent-mindedly while waiting for her ride. A group of teenagers laughed over something on their screens. Any one of them could have sent it. Or none of them. My phone buzzed again. The airdrop request timed out. I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry, my skin crawling. Who was doing this? I rushed out of the station, not stopping until I was halfway down the block. My hands were still trembling as I unlocked my apartment door, practically slamming it shut behind me. I stood there for a moment, breathing hard, trying to get my thoughts straight. Then, I opened my phone. I went straight to my airdrop settings. It was set to everyone. I didn't remember changing it to that. With shaking hands, I switched it to contacts only. Then, just to be safe, I turned off Bluetooth entirely. I needed to figure this out. I sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through every possible explanation. Was my phone hacked? I checked my privacy settings, my camera permissions, my app data. Nothing looked unusual. No unknown devices linked to my account, no strange apps running in the background. But then again, would I even know what to look for? I tried to be rational. Maybe it was a prank. Some random subway creep messing with me, sending airdrops to strangers just to freak them out. But that didn't explain the photos. The ones on his phone. The ones of me. How the hell did he have them? And then, another thought crept in I didn't want to consider. What if my apartment was compromised? That picture of me in my pajamas, someone had to have taken it. From inside my own home, I felt my stomach twist. I stood up, moving room by room, checking every inch of my apartment. I opened every closet, pushed aside the coats, checked under the bed, ran my fingers along the edges of my mirror, looking for anything off. I stared up at the smoke detector. My heart pounded in my chest. It was just a normal detector. No hidden lenses, no strange black dots like the ones I had read about online. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I grabbed a chair, stood on it, and pulled the smoke detector from the ceiling. My hands fumbled as I pried it open. Nothing. No wires, no cameras, just a regular battery-powered alarm. I let out a slow, shaky breath. I was losing it, but something in me wouldn't let it go. I checked the air vents, the shower head, the tiny gap between the fridge and the wall. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I knew what I was afraid of, and I was terrified that I'd find it. That night I was terrified. Every sound made my skin freeze. Every shadow seemed too dark, too deep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening. For what, I wasn't sure. I must have drifted off at some point because the next thing I knew, my phone was vibrating. A text. Unknown number. Check your email. A slow wave of dread rolled through me. I didn't want to check, but I did. My inbox had one new email. No subject line, no sender name. I hesitated before tapping it open. There was just one attachment. A video file. I exhaled sharply, my fingers icy as I tapped the screen. The video was dark at first. Then the image came into focus. My apartment. My bedroom. The angle was slightly tilted like a camera had been placed low to the ground, near the floor. The video was grainy, dimly lit by the glow of my bedside lamp. And then movement. My chest tightened. In the frame, I saw myself. Lying in bed, asleep. My breath hitched. The timestamp in the corner showed it was from last night. A full-body shiver ran through me. Someone had recorded me in my own apartment. While I was sleeping, I felt a wave of nausea. The video kept playing. I wanted to turn it off, but I couldn't look away. Then, near the end, something changed. The camera angle shifted slightly, as if someone had picked it up. For the briefest moment, I saw movement near the bottom of the screen, a shape, a hand. And then, just before the video cut off, a face. Just a flicker of it. Too fast to fully process. But I saw enough. It was him. The man from the subway. He had been inside my apartment, watching me, recording me. My stomach lurched. I dropped my phone onto the table, stumbling backward, my breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. This was real. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't some stupid prank. He had been here. He had been in my home. I fumbled for my phone, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I dialed 911. The line rang once, twice. Then, before the dispatcher could even speak, I choked out the words, "There's someone watching me." The 911 dispatcher's voice came through the speaker, calm but firm. "What's your emergency?" I was shaking too hard to answer right away. My breath came out uneven, my mind still reeling from the video I had just watched. I swallowed, forcing myself to speak. "There's someone watching me. He was in my apartment." A pause. Then, is he still inside now? I glanced around, my pulse roaring in my ears. The apartment was silent, no footsteps, no movement, but I didn't trust it. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice breaking slightly. "But I have proof he sent me a video of me from last night." Another pause. The dispatcher's voice remained steady. "I'm sending officers to your location now. Can you safely leave the apartment?" I wanted to. I wanted to run, to grab my keys and bolt, to never set foot in this place again. But I had checked everything earlier. The doors, the windows, the vents. There had been nothing. So how had he gotten in? I felt my stomach twist. If he had a way in, what if he was still here? I exhaled shakily, gripping my phone. "I'm leaving now." I grabbed my keys with trembling fingers and headed for the front door. My hands were slick with sweat as I fumbled with the lock. I had just turned the knob when the floor creaked. Right behind me. Every nerve in my body froze. I didn't turn around. I didn't breathe. The dispatcher was still on the line. I whispered, barely audible. Someone's here. A sharp inhale from the other end. Get out now. My entire body snapped into motion. The cold air hit me as I stumbled into the hallway, my heart slamming against my ribs. I didn't look back, I just ran. I only stopped once I was outside, standing under the streetlights, gasping for air. Then I heard the sirens. The cops didn't waste time. They swept the apartment, guns drawn. I stood outside, arms wrapped tightly around myself, my entire body still trembling. Minutes passed. Then one of the officers reappeared, shaking his head. Nobody's inside. I swallowed hard. There has to be. I heard him. The officer frowned but didn't dismiss me. They kept searching. Then something changed. One of them called from the bedroom. Found something. A surge of dread hit me as I followed them inside. My apartment looked the same, normal, like nothing had happened. But as I stepped into my bedroom, I saw where the officer was standing by my closet. The door was wide open. Inside, my clothes hung undisturbed. My shoes were neatly lined up against the wall. But the officer wasn't looking at my clothes. He was looking above them. At the ceiling panel, a small square attic access panel, one that had been shifted slightly out of place. I yanked the door open and sprinted. I felt a sharp chill crawl up my spine. I had never noticed it before. One of the officers grabbed a chair, standing on it, to push the panel open. The moment he did, a wave of cold, stale air drifted down. Then a rope ladder, rolled up, hidden against the beams. Someone had been climbing up there. My entire body went numb. He had been in the ceiling, watching me, listening. One of the officers climbed up, flashlight in hand. I held my breath, barely aware that I was gripping my own arms so tightly my fingers were digging into my skin. Then his voice. Jesus, you're gonna want to see this. I didn't want to see it, but I had to. They helped me up the ladder, and as my head poked through the opening, my stomach lurched. It was a small crawl space. Not an actual attic, just a narrow stretch of beams and insulation. But there was enough room to lie down. And someone had. A thin mattress, a pile of food wrappers, empty water bottles. And the worst part? A notebook. I felt sick as one of the officers flipped it open. The pages were filled with dates, notes, times. My name. The officer turned a page, his jaw tightening. Then he showed it to me. My stomach dropped. It was a sketch of my bedroom. The bed, the closet, the exact position of my desk, my mirror, everything. And in the corner, drawn with painful detail, a tiny camera, tucked behind my bookshelf. My breath hitched. I spun around, staring at my bookshelf like it had just come alive. The officers moved fast. They pulled the bookshelf away from the wall. And there it was, a small black camera, perfectly hidden, perfectly placed, watching me every night. I thought I was going to be sick. One of the officers exhaled sharply. He's been here a while. I stared at the mattress in the attic, the wrappers, the notes. How long had he been living above me? 1 month? 2? Long enough to memorize my routines. Long enough to know exactly when I was asleep. I didn't go back to the apartment, not even to grab my things. The police took everything as evidence. The camera, the notebook, the rope ladder, but they never found him. Whoever he was gone. Vanished, like he had never existed at all. They checked the security footage from my building, looking for someone entering or leaving. But there was nothing. No signs of forced entry. No records of anyone coming in that shouldn't have been there. It was like he had been inside the whole time. And then, a few days later, I got another email. No subject, no message. Just one attachment. A photo of me, sleeping, timestamp 2 nights ago. After I had already left, I changed everything. New number, new email. I moved across the city, got a new job, found an apartment with no attic, no crawl spaces, no vents big enough for anyone to hide in. And still, sometimes late at night I wake up feeling watched. I tell myself it's paranoia, that I'm safe, that he's gone. But deep down, I know the truth. He was never trying to hurt me. He was just watching. And maybe he still is. I booked the Airbnb on a whim. Work had been suffocating, my phone never stopped buzzing, and I couldn't remember the last time I had an actual conversation that wasn't work-related. I needed space, just a few days away from my apartment, away from deadlines, away from people in general. The listing was exactly what I was looking for: a secluded guest house on the edge of a small town, tucked between a row of evergreens, promising peace, privacy, and the perfect weekend getaway. The photos showed a cozy one-bedroom cabin, all modern furnishings and soft, warm lighting. It looked clean, well-kept, and most importantly, had a perfect 5-star rating. The host, Daniel, had over 100 positive reviews. Guests described him as friendly but hands-off, the type who gave you your space but was always available if you needed anything. It sounded ideal. I booked it for 3 nights. I should have done more research. I arrived just after sunset on Friday. The drive had been longer than expected, winding roads through patches of dense forest. The last 30 minutes completely dark aside from my headlights cutting through the trees. The place was even more remote than I'd realized. By the time I pulled into the gravel driveway, the sky was deep indigo, the air cool against my skin. The house itself was exactly like the pictures: a sleek, modern guest house, tucked behind the main property. A row of porch lights cast a warm glow across the front steps, making the place look inviting. I stepped out of the car, stretching my legs, taking a deep breath of fresh, pine-scented air. For a moment I felt a sense of relief. No honking, no notifications, no city noise. Just quiet. I grabbed my bag and made my way to the front door, where a keypad lock blinked red. I checked my email for the entry code, typed it in, and heard the soft click of the deadbolt unlocking. Inside, the place was immaculate. The scent of clean linen and faint wood polish filled the air. The living room was small but thoughtfully decorated: a gray couch, a coffee table with a stack of books, a sleek flat screen mounted on the wall. The kitchenette had stainless steel appliances, spotless countertops, and a welcome note from Daniel sitting on the island. I picked up the card. "Welcome, make yourself at home. Let me know if you need anything." Simple, polite. No weird rules or excessive house instructions. I tossed my bag onto the couch and exhaled. This was exactly what I needed. Or at least, that's what I thought. The first thing that felt off was the smoke detector. It was directly above the bidon of those sleek, modern units, flush with the ceiling. But there was a tiny black dot in the center of it, barely noticeable unless you were lying down and looking straight up. I wouldn't have thought twice about it, except for one thing. It was angled, not straight down like most detectors. It was tilted slightly downward toward the bed. I sat up slowly, my stomach tightening. It was probably nothing. Maybe it was just a design choice. Maybe I was overthinking it. Still, something gnawed at me. I stood on the bed, reaching up to inspect it. My fingers brushed over the small black dot. It wasn't smooth like the rest of the device. It felt like glass. A lens. My chest tightened. Number it couldn't be. I climbed down and grabbed my phone, quickly Googling how to tell if a smoke detector is a hidden camera. The results sent a sharp chill through me. Most modern hidden cameras use infrared sensors, meaning they'll reflect light in a certain way. If you shine a flashlight at them, the lens will often glow or bounce light back at you. My hands felt clammy as I turned on my phone's flashlight and aimed it at the black dot. For a second, nothing happened. Then a faint glint. My breath hitched. I swallowed hard, my skin prickling. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe it was just the angle or the ceiling paint reflecting back at me. But something inside me wasn't convinced. I needed to be sure. I opened the camera on my phone and switched it to selfie mode. Then I held it up, angling it toward the smoke detector, looking at it through the screen. There it was, a tiny blinking red light. A camera. My stomach dropped. I stared at it, my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't some internet rumor. This was real. I was being recorded. I dropped the phone onto the bed, suddenly hyper-aware of my surroundings. How long had it been running? How many guests had stayed here without knowing? I felt exposed, violated. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, snapped a photo of the detector, and stormed out of the bedroom. My mind was racing, but I knew one thing: I was getting out of there. I grabbed my bag and headed for the front door. My fingers fumbled with the lock as I tried to steady my breathing. The deadbolt clicked, and I yanked the door open, stepping onto the porch. The cool night air hit my face, but it didn't calm me. I turned to my car and froze. A figure stood at the edge of the driveway, just standing there, watching. I couldn't make out the details, just the outline of a tall man, half shrouded in darkness. I took a shaky step back. "Daniel?" My voice came out uneven, barely above a whisper. The figure didn't move. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he turned slow, deliberate, and walked into the trees. I stood there, my breath ragged, my body rigid with fear. I didn't wait. I bolted for the car, threw my bag into the passenger seat, and locked the doors the second I was inside. My hands were trembling so badly I struggled to get the key in the ignition. Finally, the engine roared to life. I didn't look back. I sped out of that driveway so fast the tires kicked up gravel, my heart still hammering. I drove straight into town and parked outside a well-lit gas station. Only then did I realize I was still shaking. I reached for my phone, ready to call Airbnb support, ready to report what I had found. But when I opened the app, something made my stomach drop. The listing was gone, not just unavailable, completely erased. And Daniel? His account had been deleted. I had no idea who he really was, or where that footage had ended up. I sat in my car, parked outside a gas station, gripping my phone so tightly that my fingers ached. The Airbnb listing was gone, vanished like it had never existed. And Daniel? Deleted. I stared at the screen, my breathing uneven. How? Just an hour ago, his account had over 100 glowing reviews. Now, it was as if he'd never been there at all. I forced myself to take a slow breath, my mind racing. There had to be an explanation. Maybe Airbnb removed the listing after multiple reports. Maybe Daniel shut it down himself, covering his tracks the moment he realized I'd figured it out. Either way, I had no way to contact him. But I wasn't letting this go. I opened the Airbnb app's customer support chat and started typing. I just stayed at a listing that had hidden cameras. The host's account is gone, but I need to report this. I sent the message and waited, my leg bouncing with anxious energy. The gas station parking lot was nearly empty, the fluorescent lights above casting a sterile glow on my windshield. A response popped up almost immediately. "Hello, thank you for reaching out. Can you provide the listing address and any photos or videos you took?" I quickly typed out the address and attached the picture of the smoke detector camera. Another message came. "We take privacy violations very seriously. Our trust and safety team will investigate immediately. Did you notice any other concerning details about the property or host? I hesitated, then typed, I saw someone outside right before I left. I think it was the host. The reply was slower this time. Were you harmed or threatened in any way? I exhaled, rubbing my temple. Number, not physically, but something wasn't right. I typed, no, but it felt like he was watching me. There was another pause then. We strongly recommend filing a police report in your local jurisdiction. Please let us know if you need further assistance. It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was all they could do. Airbnb wouldn't hunt this guy down, they'd just remove him from their platform and move on. I needed to take this to the police. The station was about 10 minutes away, a squat brick building that looked more like an office than a law enforcement facility. I parked, gripping the wheel tightly for a moment before stepping out. Inside, the air was cool, sterile. A tired-looking officer sat behind a thick glass window. I cleared my throat. Hi, I need to report something. The officer glanced up. What's the issue? I hesitated, suddenly feeling stupid. What was I even going to say? I found a camera in my Airbnb, then my host disappeared. It sounded crazy, but I couldn't just let it go. I took a breath. I stayed at an Airbnb tonight. I found a hidden camera in the bedroom. I left immediately, but when I tried to report it, the host's account had been deleted. The listing was erased, too. I don't know who he really is, and I'm worried about where the footage might end up. The officer's expression shifted. He sat up straighter. A hidden camera? I nodded quickly. In the smoke detector facing the bed. He grabbed a notepad. Did you take photos? I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the picture and showing him. His eyes narrowed. That's not good. I felt a surge of relief. At least he was taking it seriously. Did you find any others? He asked. I hesitated. I didn't get the chance to check everywhere. Once I found that one, I panicked and left. The officer nodded, scribbling something down. You said the listing disappeared? Yeah. When I went back to check, it was completely gone. Same with the host's profile. The officer's brow furrowed. He tapped his pen against the desk, thinking, Do you remember the address? I nodded, quickly reciting it. He turned to his computer, typing. The glow from the monitor reflected off his glasses as he scanned the screen. Then his expression changed. His shoulders stiffened slightly, his eyes flicking back and forth as he read something. My stomach clenched. What? He glanced at me. How long ago did you book this place? A week ago. Why? Another pause. Then he exhaled, sitting back in his chair. That house doesn't belong to anyone named Daniel. A cold wave of unease crawled up my spine. What do you mean? He turned the monitor slightly, showing me the screen. The property was listed under a completely different name. Not Daniel. Someone else. Someone who hadn't owned it for over a year. I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering. Then who the hell did I just rent it from? The officer leaned forward. That's what we need to find out. The next few hours were a blur of questions, reports, and waiting. Another officer took me to a small interview room, where I went through everything: how I booked the listing, what I found, the man I saw outside. Then they asked a question I hadn't considered. Did you leave anything behind? I swallowed hard. Yeah, a few things. In my rush to get out, I hadn't even thought about it. My toiletries, a charger, some clothes in the bathroom. The officer's expression darkened. We need to send someone to check the house. A pit of dread formed in my stomach. 2 hours later, I was sitting in the station lobby when an officer walked in, a serious expression on his face. We checked the house, he said. I sat up. And? He hesitated, then said something that made my entire body go cold. It was empty. I blinked. What? No furniture, no bedding, no dishes, just empty. My mouth went dry. That wasn't possible. I had slept there. I had walked through the kitchen, touched the couch, unpacked my bag. And now? Nothing. like I had imagined the whole thing. The officer crossed his arms. Either this guy cleared out in a matter of hours, or he never lived there at all. A sinking realization hit me. It was staged. The officer nodded grimly. That's what we think. I felt sick. I had stayed in a fake house, rented from a fake person, and the entire time I had been watched. My voice came out weak. Did you find any cameras? The officer sighed. We found mounts for them, but they were all gone. Every trace of surveillance, every hidden device wiped clean. Whatever footage had been taken of me was already out there. I had no idea where, or who was watching. I sat in the police station, my hands gripping the arms of the chair, my mind spinning. The house was empty, stripped bare, like it had never been furnished in the first place, like I had imagined the whole thing. But I hadn't. I had slept in that bed, touched those countertops, stood under that hidden camera, and felt my stomach turn when I realized what it was. And now it was all gone. The officer in front of me, a man in his late 40s with a weary expression, folded his hands on the desk. I need you to be honest with me. I met his gaze, my pulse still hammering. I am. He nodded slightly. Tell me one more time, step by step. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath, and went through it all again. The listing, the perfect reviews, the house that looked just like the photos, how I'd settled in, unpacked, and gone to bed thinking I was completely alone. Then the smoke detector, the black dot that wasn't supposed to be there, the reflection in my camera that gave it away, how I'd fled only to see him, the man standing at the edge of the driveway watching me. The officer listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he exhaled and leaned back in his chair. We're going to run a search on Daniel. I frowned. His account was deleted. The officer's jaw tightened slightly. That doesn't mean he's gone. His partner, a younger officer with sharp eyes, spoke for the first time. Airbnb hosts need verified identities to list properties. Even if he deleted his account, we might be able to trace it. A flicker of hope sparked in my chest. But then, the older officer's voice dropped slightly. You said the house belonged to someone else, that the actual owner hadn't lived there in over a year. I nodded. He exchanged a look with his partner. Then he reached for a manila folder on the desk and slid it toward me. We pulled the records. That house has been vacant for a while. No official tenants. No one named Daniel ever owned it. I stared at the folder, my throat tightening. So, what does that mean? The officer's voice was flat. It means someone broke in, set up fake furniture, and ran an illegal Airbnb scam out of a house they didn't own. The words hit me like a punch. I shook my head. It looked real. It felt lived in. The younger officer leaned forward. That's the point. Staging a property isn't hard if you know what you're doing. Cheap rental furniture, a few decorations. It doesn't take much to make a place look legitimate. I felt sick. I had stayed in a house that didn't belong to anyone. I had booked a room in a place that was never supposed to be rented. The officer continued. We checked the walls, floors, outlets. There were mounts for at least 4 hidden cameras. 2 in the bedroom, 1 in the bathroom vent, 1 in the living room. But they were all removed before we got there. My stomach churned. I already knew what he was going to say next. That footage is out there somewhere. I looked down at my hands. My knuckles were white. Can you track him down? The younger officer ran a hand through his short-cropped hair. We're trying. If he used a stolen identity, it'll be harder. But if we find anything, we'll let you know. It didn't feel like enough. It wasn't enough. But what else could I do? For the next few days, I barely slept. I kept my phone on me at all times, refreshing the Airbnb app, checking my email for any updates. Nothing. I searched online, hoping to find something about other guests who had stayed there. No one had reported it. No Reddit threads. No news articles, just silence. Then, on the fourth day, I got an email. Airbnb support. Privacy violation case update. I opened it with shaking hands. The email was short, too short. They were conducting an internal investigation, but couldn't provide any details. They had removed the listing permanently. The host was banned from the platform. That was it. No legal action, no real consequences. I felt my stomach drop. He got away with it. A week later, I finally got a call from the police. It wasn't what I wanted to hear. They had nothing. The Airbnb account was linked to a fake identity, prepaid phone numbers, and an untraceable bank account. Whoever he was, he had planned this carefully. No fingerprints, no DNA, no trail. It was like he never existed. They promised to keep the case open, but I could hear it in their voices. This was over for them. Not for me. I tried to move on. I deleted the Airbnb app, blocked their emails. I stopped traveling altogether for a while. Even now, I triple-check every hotel room, every Airbnb my friends book. But the worst part, the part that still keeps me up at night, I never found out who he was, what he wanted, where he uploaded that footage, because someone, somewhere, has it. Maybe it's locked away on a hard drive. Maybe it's on the dark web, passed around by people I'll never meet. Maybe it's already been deleted. Or maybe, just maybe, it was never about the videos. Maybe he just wanted to watch me, in real time, and now that I left, maybe he's found someone else. I met him when I was 8 years old. At first, there was nothing unusual about him, just another kid in the neighborhood. His name was Darren, and he had this quiet, almost still way of carrying himself, like he was always listening but never truly present. We became friends because, at that age, friendship is simple. You live close, you play together, and that's all there is to it. But looking back now, I realize there were signs, things that should have made me run the other way. Like the way he never seemed afraid of anything, or the way he smiled whenever something got hurt. I remember the first time I saw that look on his face. We were 10, playing in the woods behind my house when Darren spotted a bird with a broken wing. It was small, helpless, twitching on the ground. I wanted to help it, to take it home, maybe tell my mom. Darren just stared. Then, before I could stop him, he picked up a rock and smashed it down. The bird squealed once, then went silent. I froze. Darren, what the hell? He looked at me, tilting his head like I had asked something strange. It was already gonna die. I felt sick. I wanted to run home, to get away from him. But he just stood there, completely unbothered. That should have been the moment I realized something was wrong with him. But I was a kid, and kids don't always understand danger when it's staring them in the face. So I stayed friends with Darren. And over the years, things only got worse. As we got older, Darren's fascination with things he shouldn't do only grew. At first it was little things. Stealing candy from the store, sneaking into places we weren't supposed to be. But there was always something off about the way he did it. He never stole because he wanted something. He stole because he liked the thrill of taking it. He liked knowing he could get away with it, and when he didn't, he never looked guilty. I remember the time he got caught pocketing a lighter at the gas station. The clerk grabbed his wrist, threatened to call the cops, and while I stood there panicked, Darren just stared at him. Not angry, not scared, just watching, like he was waiting to see what the man would do next. The guy let him go with a warning, and as soon as we walked out, Darren smiled. Voila, it was bluffing, he said, like it was a game. Then there was the incident with the neighborhood cat. Fluffy little thing, belonged to this old lady down the street. One day it went missing. Posters went up, people searched, but no one found a trace. Except I did. Or at least, I found Darren sitting behind his garage with a knife, his hands dirty, something half buried in the dirt. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know. But I remember the way he looked at me when he noticed I was there. Like he wasn't ashamed, wasn't guilty, just curious about what I'd do next. I wish I had told someone then. Maybe if I had, things wouldn't have gone as far as they did. By the time we hit high school, I started pulling away from Darren. He wasn't just a weird kid anymore, he was dangerous. The way he talked about people was unsettling, like they were nothing more than objects. He could be charming when he wanted to be, though. He had a way of making teachers love him, convincing people to do things for him, making girls think he actually cared about them. But I knew better. I had seen the way he enjoyed hurting things, the way he only ever seemed truly alive when he was causing chaos. I didn't want to be around for whatever he had planned next. And then one night I got a call. It was late, sometime past midnight, and my phone buzzed on my nightstand. I groggily grabbed it, squinting at the screen. It was Darren. He never called. He wasn't the type to need people. Something in my gut told me not to answer, but I did anyway. Hello? My voice was thick with sleep. There was silence for a moment, just static and breathing. Then, in a calm, almost casual tone, he said, "I did something bad." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" Another pause. Then, barely above a whisper, "I need your help." I sat up, suddenly wide awake. Every instinct told me to hang up, to not get involved. But Darren had a way of pulling people in, making you feel like you had to do what he wanted. Against my better judgment, I asked, "Where are you?" "Come to the old train tracks. Near the woods." Then he hung up. I stared at my phone, heart pounding. I should have gone back to sleep. I should have ignored it. But something about his voice, the calmness of it, unsettled me. I got dressed, grabbed my bike, and rode out. The train tracks were abandoned, stretching through the woods like a forgotten scar. The night was cold, my breath visible in the air as I pedaled faster, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. When I got there, Darren was standing near the edge of the trees, hands in his pockets, completely still. The way he stood there, waiting, sent a chill through me. I got off my bike and took a hesitant step forward. "What's going on?" He turned, and that's when I saw it. Behind him, half hidden in the brush, was a body. For the sake of privacy, I won't be using real names. Even now, years later, I don't know if he's still out there. I don't know if he ever got caught. But if he is, I don't want my name tied to any of this. I'll call him Darren. And the person lying in the dirt that night, I won't give them a name at all. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the body. My brain refused to accept what I was looking at. It didn't seem real, the way the limbs were twisted, the way the face was turned just slightly away from me, just enough so I didn't have to look them in the eye. I swallowed hard. "Darren? What did you do?" He tilted his head, watching my reaction with that same eerie curiosity I'd seen in him since we were kids. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he muttered, his tone almost casual, like he was talking about a broken toy, not a dead person. I took a step back, my mind screaming at me to run, but Darren just sighed. "Look, I didn't call you to freak out. I called you because I need your help." I shook my head. No, I'm not." He took a step closer. I could barely see him in the dim light, but I could feel the weight of his stare. "You are going to help me, unless you want to be just as guilty as I am." My stomach twisted. Guilty. That word clung to me like tar, thick and suffocating. I hadn't done anything, but I was here, wasn't I? I was standing next to a body in the middle of the woods, the only other person around being a guy I had known for years, a guy I had ignored the warning signs about. And just like that, I realized he had planned this. Not the killing, maybe, but calling me, making sure I was involved, making sure I couldn't just walk away. That part was on purpose. I was trapped. My whole body was screaming at me to turn around and run, but my legs wouldn't move. I kept staring at the body, my mind desperately trying to convince itself that this wasn't real, that maybe it was some kind of sick joke, but it wasn't. The air smelled like iron, the dirt beneath the body looked dark and wet, and Darren, if that was even the name I should be using, stood there, watching me, waiting. My voice caught in my throat. "I don't know what you expect me to do." Darren sighed, almost like he was disappointed in me. "I expected you to not be such a little bitch about this." He turned and kicked the dirt near the body, shifting some of the leaves over it. "We need to move it." There's a creek not far from here. That was it. That was the moment I realized he wasn't panicked. He wasn't regretting anything. He was calm. He had already thought this through. I took another step back, feeling my breath quicken. I'm not helping you. Darren's jaw clenched, but he didn't move toward me. He just tilted his head slightly, like he was analyzing me, running through his next move. That's what always unsettled me about him. He didn't react like a normal person. He calculated. He weighed his options. And right now, I was one of those options. You really want to go to the cops? His voice was quiet, almost amused. You think they'll believe you had nothing to do with it? I swallowed hard. I hadn't done anything, but the truth was, I wasn't sure. We had been friends for years. I had ignored so many red flags. Who would believe that I just happened to get a call in the middle of the night and showed up next to a dead body with no involvement? I didn't answer. Darren took that as hesitation, and he pounced on it. I called you first. Your phone's going to show you were here. You ran with me when we used to steal shit as kids. People saw us together all the time. I tell them you were here when it happened? That we planned this together? He smiled. I guarantee you they believe me over you. I felt sick. I could barely hear anything over the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. Darren had put me in checkmate before I even knew we were playing a game. I had two choices, help him or find a way out. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing in circles. I could feel the sweat building at the back of my neck, my hands clammy and shaking. Darren's words echoed in my head, and for a moment, I truly believed I had no choice. But then something clicked, a sudden sharp clarity, like a light bulb flickering on in the dark. I did have a choice. I could walk away, I could run, I could scream, but I had to do something before this all spiraled further. I swallowed, took a deep breath, and said, I'm leaving. Darren's eyes narrowed, and I saw something flicker in them. Anger, maybe even a flash of disbelief. He stepped closer to me, but I didn't back down. I met his gaze, and for the first time in years, I didn't flinch. You think you're just going to walk away from this? His voice was low, cold. You're with me or you're against me. That's how this works. I shook my head, my mind racing to find a way out, a way to end this without being caught up in any more of his madness. My fingers fumbled in my pocket, reaching for my phone, the small, hidden device I had switched off earlier because I knew Darren was smart enough to check if I was recording. The minute I pulled it out, though, Darren's eyes locked on it. He lunged toward me, but I was already pressing the emergency 911 button, and before he could grab me, the call connected. Help! I shouted, my voice shaky. I'm with someone. I'm in danger. Please, someone, help! Darren froze. He didn't yell. He didn't run. He just stared, as if for the first time in his life something was out of his control. It didn't matter. The dispatcher had already heard enough. The sirens came within minutes. I don't know what happened to Darren after that. I was taken to the station where I gave my statement, using a fake name for my own safety. The body in the woods was identified, and Darren was arrested hours later. There were no charges I could be tied to, no evidence that I had helped him. But I didn't trust the system. I couldn't. I packed up my things soon after and moved away. The memories of Darren, his calm smile, his twisted sense of control, still haunt me. Even now I keep my distance from people like him. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, but more than that, I wonder how many other people he's convinced to do his bidding. Because someone like Darren, he doesn't stop until he gets what he wants.